For decades, the Islamic Republic of Iran pursued a singular strategic ambition: to build a military architecture so deeply buried, so dispersed, and so redundant that no foreign power, not Israel, not NATO, and not the United States, could ever decisively destroy it in a single campaign. That doctrine, forged in the fires of the 1980s Iran-Iraq war, when Iranian cities and infrastructure were exposed and vulnerable, became the philosophical backbone of everything the Revolutionary Guards constructed in the years that followed. By the mid-2020s, that architecture had evolved into something Western intelligence analysts had long suspected, but never fully mapped, until satellite imagery, human intelligence networks, and signal intercepts began to reveal the staggering truth. What lay beneath Iran's mountains, deserts, and granite ridgelines was not merely a defensive network, it was a fully integrated subterranean war machine. The story begins in earnest in the spring of 2025, when cumulative intelligence assessments from the CIA, Israel's Mossad, and allied agencies reached a decisive threshold. U.S. intelligence agencies were tracking mounting evidence that Iran's nuclear program was advancing close to a critical threshold, with Israeli officials sharing information they considered deeply concerning, though American agencies debated whether Iran had yet crossed the nuclear red line. The key facility at the center of this intelligence storm was Fordo, a fuel enrichment plant carved into the heart of a mountain. Fordo is lodged an estimated 260 feet below rock and soil and is reportedly protected by Iranian and Russian missile defense systems, widely considered critical to Iran's nuclear weapons program, putting it at the center of Israel and the United States' stated objective. But Fordo was only one node in a sprawling constellation of underground infrastructure that Western planners were struggling to fully characterize. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched what would become known as the 12-Day War, a sweeping aerial campaign targeting Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure with a scope and precision that stunned even seasoned defense analysts. The Israeli Air Force hammered Natanz, Isfahan, Parchin, and a string of air defense installations across the country. The Israeli strategy, which had transformed over 2 years from containing Iranian proxies to directly striking Iran itself, succeeded in neutralizing Hezbollah's second strike threat in Lebanon and the air defense systems in Syria, thereby opening a direct flight path that allowed aerial freedom of operation in Iranian skies, enabling the destruction of about 2/3 of Iran's ballistic missile launchers and between 1/3 to half of the Iranian ballistic missile arsenal, which was estimated at approximately 2,500 missiles. But Israeli aircraft, however capable, carried a critical limitation. They could not deliver the one weapon that the deepest Iranian facilities actually required, the massive ordnance penetrator. That is where the United States entered the equation. On June 21, 2025, President Donald Trump announced that Washington had joined the campaign. Operation Midnight Hammer involved 125 aircraft and specialty B-2 bombers carrying 30,000-pound bombs named massive ordnance penetrators, colloquially known as bunker busters, weapons only owned by the United States. The B-2 Spirit, a stealth flying wing developed by Northrop Grumman and maintained at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, flew combat missions that would be discussed in defense academies for years. 3 primary targets were struck: Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. Israel had attacked Fordo's missile defense systems but appeared to have left the underground facility unscathed. That changed when Washington's B-2 bomber dropped a bunker buster on the site, with initial footage showing massive plumes of smoke gathering above the clandestine subterranean location. Aerial imagery revealed 6 large craters and ash blanketing the mountainside. The physical drama was undeniable. But what had actually been destroyed beneath that granite mountain remained a deeply contested question. The early damage assessments were explosive, not in their findings of destruction, but in the political controversy they ignited. CNN and the New York Times reported that the Defense Intelligence Agency had produced a classified preliminary bomb damage assessment indicating that the strikes damaged above-ground structures and sealed the entrances to 2 targets, but did not destroy the associated underground facilities and the centrifuges required to produce enriched uranium. The White House forcefully rejected this assessment. The DIA's preliminary conclusions, that Iran had been set back by less than 6 months, were labeled inaccurate, with Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe citing new intelligence suggesting the damage was far more severe, with the Pentagon ultimately stating that Iran's nuclear program had been set back by 1 to 2 years. The gap between these assessments reflected not just analytical disagreement, but a fundamental intelligence challenge. It is extraordinarily difficult to assess damage to facilities buried under hundreds of feet of granite and reinforced concrete without placing observers on the ground. What happened next confirmed that the campaign, whatever its actual damage, had not solved the problem. It had only sharpened Iran's resolve to bury it deeper. One of the Iranian lessons from the war was the transfer of the remainder of the nuclear program to underground facilities more immune and hidden from the eyes of IAEA inspectors and intelligence satellites. Satellite imagery analysts at the Institute for Science and International Security, the so-called Good ISIS, and commercial providers including Planet Labs began documenting a remarkable reconstruction effort. Tehran had started constructing roofs to conceal developments at some of the Natanz and Isfahan nuclear facilities, and photos showed various openings to Isfahan's underground facilities being covered or filled up. Moves that nuclear experts suggested were designed to protect nuclear assets below ground from a potential future American strike. Iran was not simply rebuilding what had been destroyed. It was engineering a new generation of concealment, learning directly from the targeting logic that had nearly unraveled its program. The most alarming discovery came not from a single strike, but from patient, sustained satellite monitoring. Parallel to the work in Isfahan, the excavation of the Pickaxe Mountain facility, known in Farsi as Kuh-e Kolan-Gazla, south of Natanz, continued with greater intensity. The facility was being dug at an estimated depth of approximately 80 to 100 meters under hard granite rock, specifically from an Iranian understanding that this depth might provide immunity against the American GBU-57 bomb, the type dropped by B-2 bombers in Operation Midnight Hammer. This is a critical detail that demands careful reading. Iran was not simply hardening existing sites. It was designing entirely new facilities with a specific weapon system in mind, engineering its underground architecture to defeat the very tool that had struck it. This is adaptive deterrence at the structural level, not just doctrine, but geology weaponized against American air power. Simultaneously, the crisis over Iran's surviving fissile material introduced a second and potentially more dangerous dimension to this strategic picture. Although the IAEA had not been given access to Iran's bombed sites to confirm what portion of the 60% enriched uranium stockpile survived the June 2025 strikes, IAEA Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi assessed that little over 200 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium remained underground at Isfahan, an amount sufficient for approximately 5 nuclear warheads if enriched to weapons-grade levels. The uranium had not disappeared. It had simply gone underground, sealed beneath rubble and reinforced concrete, monitored at a distance through satellite imagery and intercepted communications. The U.S. intelligence community assessed that Iran could access the material stored at Isfahan via a small opening and that the United States and Israel were monitoring the site with a high degree of confidence that they would detect any attempt to move the material. But confidence of detection is not the same as capacity to prevent dispersal, and both Washington and Jerusalem understood that the window for definitive action was narrowing. Iran's underground military infrastructure extended far beyond the nuclear domain. Iran dispersed its arsenal across numerous sites, including underground missile cities. Before the 12-day war, reporting identified at least 24 missile sites in western Iran, with major clusters around Kermanshah, such as the Kanesh Canyon complex with extensive tunnel bunkers, and others extending into Loristan and the Zagros region. Many facilities featured multiple tunnel entrances for quick deployment, and some included hardened silos like the Haji Abad complex in Hormozgan facing Gulf targets. These missile cities were not passive storage vaults. They were designed for combat operations. The tunnels housed road mobile transporter erector launcher trucks that could emerge, fire, and retreat in rapid shoot and scoot operations that deny fixed targeting solutions to adversary aircraft. The IRGC had built a dispersed, mobile, survivable second strike architecture, and it had done so largely underground, invisible to all but the most persistent surveillance assets. As the military campaign evolved into March 2026, the combined U.S.-Israeli force shifted its focus in ways that signaled both tactical success and strategic frustration. U.S. Central Command Commander Admiral Brad Cooper announced that the combined force had achieved air dominance over Iran, a condition allowing joint forces to operate with effective impunity throughout the adversary's battle space. Iranian ballistic missile attacks had decreased by 90% since the war began, and drone attacks were down 83%. These are striking military metrics, but they measure suppression, not elimination. Iran's underground missile cities remained largely intact. Its surviving fissile material remained unaccounted for by IAEA inspectors, and its most deeply buried facilities, including the new excavations at Pickaxe Mountain, had yet to be meaningfully targeted. The Israeli operations that followed in early March 2026 underscored both the intelligence penetration of Iran's reconstitution efforts and the persistent difficulty of achieving decisive effect. The IDF struck Iran's advanced explosives nuclear facility at Parchin Taligan II, a site that had previously served as an AMAD project nuclear weapons site used for explosives testing, and IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Effie Defrin reported the destruction of a secret Iranian nuclear weapons development site called Min Zadai on the northeast outskirts of Tehran, dealing with weapons group developments. IDF intelligence had followed nuclear scientists who tried to travel there clandestinely. This is intelligence tradecraft at its most operationally refined, tracking scientists rather than facilities, allowing human behavior to betray physical infrastructure that satellites alone cannot identify. The revelation of Minzadai demonstrated that Iran's underground secret was never singular. It was a system, a network, a philosophy of concealment applied across dozens of sites simultaneously. The naval dimension of this confrontation added a layer of complexity that extended well beyond the Persian Gulf. Satellite imagery confirmed that the combined force struck multiple sites at the Bandar Abbas military port in Hormozgan province, home to the IRGC Navy headquarters and the Artesh Navy Southern Forward Naval Headquarters, damaging a drone storage facility for the IRGC Navy and the Artesh Navy factory dry docks. U.S. CENTCOM also confirmed that the United States struck Iranian submarines in the first 48 hours of the campaign. Iran's Kilo-class submarines, acquired from Russia in the 1990s and quietly upgraded over decades, had long been considered a potential asymmetric threat to Gulf shipping and U.S. carrier battle groups. Their neutralization, or at minimum their suppression, was an operational priority that revealed the full-spectrum nature of Washington's strategic calculus. This was not merely a nuclear counter-proliferation mission. It was a campaign to degrade Iran's capacity to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's traded oil passes. The strategic implications of all of this reach far beyond the immediate operational theater. For NATO and European security planners, the Iranian crisis carries direct lessons about the architecture of underground military infrastructure in potential future adversary states. Russia, China, and North Korea have each invested heavily in deeply buried command facilities, missile silos, and hardened logistics networks. The operational experience gained by U.S. forces in using the B-2 and the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator against real hardened targets, and the intelligence picture that emerged of those weapons' genuine limitations will shape weapons development programs for the next generation of penetrating munitions. The fact that Iran learned from Operation Midnight Hammer and immediately began designing new facilities specifically to defeat it reveals a classic action-reaction dynamic in military competition. Every weapon reveals its own countermeasure to a sufficiently adaptive adversary. For nuclear non-proliferation architecture, the damage may be even more profound. At the end of the conflict, Iran will retain the nuclear expertise and likely key materials necessary for building a nuclear bomb. Military force cannot eliminate Tehran's proliferation risk in the long term, and the ongoing military action is creating a new set of nuclear risks and safety hazards. The IAEA, denied access to struck sites, has lost continuity of knowledge regarding Iran's centrifuge inventory and the precise location of its surviving enriched uranium. That gap between what inspectors can verify and what intelligence agencies believe to be true is precisely the space in which a nuclear weapons program can survive and reconstitute. Iran understands this. It is not an accident that its post-strike behavior has prioritized sealing tunnel entrances and deepening new excavations over any diplomatic outreach to the IAEA. What we are witnessing in strategic terms is the collision of two fundamental military doctrines. The United States and Israel believe that precision air power, sufficiently capable munitions, and superior intelligence can deny a determined adversary the capacity to develop weapons of mass destruction. Iran believes that depth, geological, architectural, and organizational, can outlast any air campaign that an adversary is politically willing to sustain. The B-2 bomber and the GBU-57 represent the most credible conventional challenge to deeply buried infrastructure in the history of warfare. And yet the pickaxe mountain excavation, currently being driven 80 to 100 meters into granite with one specific weapon in mind, suggests that Tehran's engineers have already done the arithmetic. They believe they can go deeper than the bomb can reach. The true measure of this confrontation will not be counted in craters or press conferences. It will be determined by whether Iran can successfully reconstitute a weapons-capable nuclear infrastructure in the space between its surviving fissile material, its surviving scientific expertise, and its deepening underground architecture before Western intelligence detects it and Western military power can decisively act again. History offers no guarantees in either direction, but this much is clear: the age of surgical, above-ground counter-proliferation operations is over. The next chapter will be fought in the dark, beneath mountains and tunnels that were designed specifically so that the most powerful conventional bomber in the American arsenal cannot find them. The underground war for Iran's nuclear future has not ended. It has simply moved deeper.